Welcome, guys. This is another episode of sort of another look into a book sort of video. So it's not Timber Times the show. It's not the podcast, though. This can be substituted as sort of a podcast video. So the book that we are talking about today is a book called Death of a King. I have the book right now, but I'm not going to show the book. I have it in my bag and I don't want to get it out. I'm kind of lazy. We're recording this pretty late at night, drinking some tea. But I've read the book. It's pretty interesting. It's about Martin Luther King Jr. It's specifically about his last year. It's not just about the politics around that and all that. It's about his personal life, what he did, the people involved in the conflict with him, including LBJ. I can't quite remember exactly what that stands for, but I know that Johnson is the J. But he was somebody in the huge area up top. I think he was a senator, or was he no, he wasn't. John F. Kennedy was the president at the time, but he was, I believe, a senator. Could be wrong. But he advocated for the Vietnam War and the U.S. involvement in it. But generally speaking, this book, I liked it because of the fact it included so much philosophy in a way. It really showed me that, Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't just, I have a dream about this, racism is bad. He was someone who was a pacifist. He was, I don't like violence in general. He also had a lot of issues with the government. So militarism and poverty, as stated, as Tavis Smiley, the author of the book, states, the immorality of war is married to the immorality of poverty and racism. So what that means, really, is that war, how it's bad, I guess, is related to poverty and racism. And the Vietnam War is an example of this. As another quote, I don't remember exactly, Martin Luther King Jr., the draft is just sending black people to fight with white people, to fight yellow people for land they took from red people. If I can remember properly, that along the lines. And that in a way is how the war and racism is related, and poverty. Well, of course, war causes a lot of poverty. And we've seen that in a lot of, historical moments where after war, countries will go poor, or just general cities will go poor because of the damage, or because of, the treaty, like for Germany, that Germany had to repay so much money. It was like, I can't even remember exactly how much money, but it was like, well, it's worth a lot right now. It's, but yeah, of course it was never really paid back, I don't think, because of Hitler, but that's a whole different thing. But yes, war, how it's bad, is related to the problems of poverty and racism, and that's true. But generally what we're going to talk about, the first theme would be power and privilege. And this is prevalent. This is so prevalent in this book. Generally, this whole book's about Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most well-known, pacifist black, rights supporter, though he said support some other things, but racism was one thing he fought, that he was most well known for fighting. But power and privilege also plays into things like poverty. Of course, power being, you not having enough money to do anything. Power gone. Privilege also gone because, well, what do you have privilege for? Nothing. You're poor. You have nothing to do. You're not generally oppressed like, races like African American, but you're still ignored. So it's more of a neglect in a way instead of an oppression. Because you're not thought about, but it's not like people are really directing to hate on you, because it's not generally purposeful for poverty to occur in some areas. Of course it can be, but in ways it's because of the industrialization, and the Industrial Revolution caused a lot of major poverty because of the class system has existed for a while, but it was a lot more common for those like lower class to exist very like terrible living conditions. But once the Industrial Revolution came by, poverty was seen as such a more worse thing because middle class had a lot more. Like middle class before the Industrial Revolution was not very, wasn't that high up. It was just regular ass people, just and then lower class was the general population. But here, lower class is a lot more uncommon, and it hits a lot harder because they're not, seen much. They're not really seen, because of course they are, but they're not recognized. They're not acknowledged. And this causes them to not have much of a voice, considering they literally can't do anything. At least during Elizabethan era and all that stuff before the Industrial Revolution, I guess, well, people didn't really have a voice, but still, that made up so much of the population that it was the society. But now, poverty excludes you from the society in some way, because you don't have an outreach. You have so less of a voice, and you have no way of presenting yourself. You're, literally poor. So, that's poverty, about power and privilege. But racism, of course, yes, we know on how that has to do with anything. So poverty being power related, more prevalent on that. Racism is so much more focused on privilege, but we do see a lot on power. That the privilege, oppression, not having rights, them having, like, being stripped of their basic human rights, having them go to different schools, or being literally segregated and placed separate, like literally, like not even just schools. It's black and white for anything. Like, it was categorized that the African American or black community within America specifically, they were so separated and neglected in their own way that it was a direct contact to them. It was a direct hatred, and that's why they were oppressed. That's why they had less privilege. That it's not like they had, like, I don't want to say this, but it's not like they had lethal living conditions to the point where it was like you couldn't live and you didn't have a voice because of that. No, they didn't have a voice because they were purposely being shut out. That they had enough living condition in a way, but they were literally ignored. That people hated on them specifically because of discrimination, segregation, all that, oppression, all that comes down to neglect and hatred. They also didn't have power as well. Like said, they don't have a voice. They didn't have much power. The only way that they could really do things were to get together as a group and boycott, rally, riot. But MLK Jr. wouldn't appreciate that. But we see that it's very prevalent. And this book specifically it talks about that Martin Luther King, his power, his privilege, the time that he lived in, black people had a little more power and privilege. They had just a bit more. I mean, this was during what? This was JFK time, right? So this was after Second World War. This is going into Vietnam War. John F. Kennedy, he was president in the early 1960s. So this was like not even 20 years after, I want to say like maybe 15 years after the Second World War. And the Second World War, well, of course, there was, racism, but there was a lot of indigenous racism as well. There's obviously still was, but still, this was 1960s that this took place in, like 1961 or 2, around these years. But yes, black people had just the smallest bit amount of rights. They still were being discriminated strongly. There were white supporters, I believe, if I can remember correctly, in the SCLC, the community that Martin Luther King Jr. was part of. I believe he was the president of it and the founder as well. We see that power and privilege. Martin Luther King Jr. had power. He had a voice. But the problem is he was still shut down. That his power was being diminished. Like it was being taken down because of other people like LBJ. LBJ was the vice president, not a senator. I was close. I knew that he was a president, but not during these times because John F. Kennedy was president. So I'm learning. This book doesn't talk much about politics, but it does in some sense when it comes to when Martin Luther King tries to directly, more indirectly, tries to talk to the government about no war, that stuff. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't have much power when it came to reaching out to people when, of course, his campaigns were starting to become more unpopular. That I think it was his dream speech that took him to his peak, and he's just started going down and down and down, more depressed. He stopped getting as many people. He did so many events in his earlier times, but his last year specifically, not many people really liked him, I guess, because the book he wrote, the community he had, the SCLC, he had like government people in like spying on him to make sure he wasn't doing any weird stuff, even though he was a pacifist. He never did anything violent. He didn't like doing violent things. But generally speaking, this privilege that MLK Jr. had, or well, could have had, considering he was a black man, of course, he didn't have much privilege. He was seen as such a huge figure, like a hero figure, at the time, because he had such a voice. People really saw him as an important character. Though the problem was that he stopped being so popular that, like I said, his power, the black privilege, of course, really played into him and all that. But yes, this was bad for him. This didn't really help in his last year, of course. Well, he died from assassination, and there's a theory about that, but conspiracy theory more like. But yeah, I'm not gonna really say about that. I don't want to, go disappear off the internet, even though I've been doing that. But yes, I don't know why I'm holding this with two hands, and this hand's just getting tired. So, yes, power and privilege, especially, this plays into that fact. Martin Luther King like I said, he had power, but not very much. And even when he did, it was shot down so many times. And he he didn't have much privilege as a black man, and it was hard for him to get out there. He did have white supporters, but even I believe even black supporters left him because he became so he became to be seen as unreliable, because of course he wasn't unreliable. He was a true man, but he was seen unreliable. That he didn't have much of a confident voice. He was so depressed. He was angry. Um, yes, he was a broken man. So the privilege that really plays into that, I guess you could say, is the privilege that he had to do those speaking because he was such a huge figure, but he lost some of that privilege because of the hatred that he got. That it wasn't black oppression. It was the fact that he had been going on for so long that he started aging and becoming older, and of course more black like rights advocates, they started coming up more, and they were being supported, and Martin Luther King Jr. started losing things, so his privilege as such a huge figure was lost. So that's the first theme. I would like to talk about the next theme, which is violence and the justification of it. I I strongly enjoy that the whole militarism, and this also has to do with the poverty and even the racism. Of course, this all plays into that violence, and that it's not justified. That violence is never to be justified. Violence, and you need to respect people. That violence is disrespect in any case, really. I don't believe violence is justifiable ever, and I know Martin Luther King believed the same. And he showed that a lot with his speeches about fighting militarism, that he was talking about stopping the Vietnam War. He did so many speeches really saying that he enjoys the fact that you can wake up knowing that you lived the next day, that he appreciates that you are still living, because you deserve to live, that everyone deserves to live. And I believe that too, as someone who is very stoic of a man, not in the figurative sense as in, yes, I am that in some way. At least my girlfriend says I am, with me being all like serious, all that. But no, my philosophy, Stoicism specifically, I am strong on that. I like to give people that respect, and I like to listen to them. I believe that Martin Luther King was stoic in his own way. He was very stoic. He could have been some other, I don't think he was cynic in a way. I mean, he could have been cynic. No, because cynic wasn't really respectful, but I believe he was pretty stoic in that sense, that he believed that you should respect people, that you should, I believe this is a quote from Epictetus or something, but I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it exactly, but nothing should compel you to act inhuman or out of anger, disrespect, any of that. Nothing should compel you to do that. And Martin Luther King really, really shows that you can do that. He didn't like bursting out. Of course he was loud, but he didn't like being so angry, or he didn't want to show him being sad. He tried to put on a happy face. Well, not all the time happy, but more serious sometimes when he was doing campaigns, because why would you be smiling? but Martin Luther King, he didn't care who was opposing him. What he cared about most was the fact that he was treating his enemy as the way he would treat a friend, that he was being respectful, that he would still show care. So he didn't like to insult people as well. One way that sort of a mistrust would have to do, John F. Kennedy, he denied meeting Martin Luther King Jr. until I believe it was after Martin Luther King did his rally, and it was peaceful. One of his rallies, I don't remember exactly, but John F. Kennedy ended up actually letting him into the White House after finally being proven, because even John F. Kennedy didn't really trust him at the time. So it's not being trusted and stuff like that. That's disrespect. And Martin Luther King Jr. really wanted to show respect. So he didn't act ignorant or arrogant, and this still does play into the theme of violence and the justification of it, because I guess I should say violence and disrespect and the judgment of it, of course, because yes, that was something that Martin Luther King Jr. really held on, because I can't just say the theme of this book Martin Luther King Jr.'s life is power and privilege, because racism and poverty and militarism, because I can't really say that, because I can go on about how racism was bad. Martin Luther King fought racism, poverty, and militarism by doing speeches, but I also want to really, really nail down how Martin Luther King Jr. really focused on his whole campaign as being peaceful, that he was a pacifist. He did not want to do anything violent, that there were violent protests done. I don't exactly remember who it was, but at the time, around the 1960s, when Martin Luther King Jr. was at his last year, there were violent protests being done, and he was saying that he doesn't advocate for that, that he doesn't like that he doesn't support it, that it's not that's not how you appeal to people, that's you're not supposed to, because we see this all the time. How do you think dictators get into power? Fear. You can't really get fear to bring you power and expect it to be good power, because if you're feared, you're feared. That's nothing better. Imagine the BLM group, generally the black rights, all that, the oppression, discrimination, all that against black people. Imagine that group, the supporters or the representatives of that they violently protested, and they won. But what did they win? They won the fear of anybody. They could have won the fear of the society. That's nothing better. That it's best to show that you're respectful, that you're a human, that you acknowledge that they're human too, that fear is the last thing you want to show or give, that what you want to do is show consideration. That Martin Luther King did that he wanted to show consideration, he wanted to show care. He did not want to bring fear out of people or into people. That he did not want to do that. He was the opposite of fury, anger, fear. He was the opposite of that, which I enjoy the most. And that is something that's really strong in Stoicism, especially. You shouldn't do that. as much as Stoic in a way when you think of the word Stoic, which I don't really enjoy this because it's not true, but Stoic is usually seen as sort of a blank expression, more like looking angry, if anything, a brooding stare, as my girlfriend calls it. But I don't believe that's a good representation of Stoicism. That I believe that respect is a good way to represent Stoicism. That consideration, that really shows. And that's why I think that Martin Luther King is such a Stoic man. And Stoicism can be its own theme, but that's, once again, would really fall under the whole violence, disrespect, justification thing. Stoicism. And I love that so much, that I am so passionate about Stoicism that this book really brought that out in me. That when I was taking notes, or taking quotes out of the book, to use just to look over or to write pieces for, I really looked for those kind of quotes. That I looked for Stoic related quotes, or quotes related to racism or poverty. I specifically looked for those because that's what appeals to me. Stoicism really appeals to me because it shows that you are considering the fact that the person you are opposing is also a human, and nobody deserves disrespect. Martin Luther King truly represents that, as he is, in my opinion, the most peaceful man. He we're not going to talk about the times he's drank before and gotten angry and cried and all that, but I mean, you're human. You're a human. You're going to do that, but he never showed the disrespect towards people. He didn't want to output that onto others. And I believe that might be sort of the downfall of his mentality, or not mentality, sorry, his mental health, because he had so much weight on him, but he couldn't output that much because he was out there so much, and he got so much weight put on him, but he didn't want to be the bad person. So that took a toll for him. That is something that will take a toll on you. That Martin Luther King's, the hatred that was given to him, that really took a toll. And it does. You can still get hated. I personally, when I lived in Nova Scotia, I was controversial for some reason. I don't know why. I believe I've talked about this before on previous podcasts, but I don't know why I was controversial. But I continued to show the respect, and I didn't want to be that person who was like, oh, well, people don't like me, well, I don't like them. No, even here, I'm slowly becoming controversial because, I don't know, it's hard to tell. Because none of my friends tell me why, and I wouldn't know why. People just don't like me, I guess. I don't know. But like I said, Martin Luther King, people didn't like him for some reason, even though he was a good man. He is the perfect example of a good man. That if I were to give an exact example of the most true and the most respectful man, it would be Martin Luther King Jr. That he is the most human, I guess, in a way. He's one of my idols in some way. I really look up to him, I guess, whenever I consider opposing others, especially fighting others, when it comes to having hatred. So whenever I think of that, whenever I think of the controversies I may get included in, I think of him. That I think, well, how would he deal with this? Well, he would fight back, but in the peaceful way of showing the consideration that they're also human, but the fact that he wants to show that he is a good person. though you can't judge that you're a good person. That's why Doc, which I haven't called him that, I've always called Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther King Jr., he didn't say that he was a good man. All he said was that he cared for others and that he just wants equality. That he wasn't saying, "Oh, my dream is for black people to rule the world." No, he said my dream, well, one of his many dreams that he said was for, well, the first thing about racism was that black and white children can go to school like in the same schools. And another dream he had, and this has to do with respect, and this is a good way with respect, but also fighting racism, that his children, that they'll be judged not on the color of their skin, but of the character of them. Something like that. I don't want this video to be too long, because that would just be painful. But I just wanted to talk about the themes specifically. But yes, that's all that I got to talk about. And all I'm going to talk about, just the themes, generally speaking. Probably went on for too long, but I'm going to edit down quite a bit. I mean, I've been recording for like an hour or so. So yeah. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to try to edit a lot more videos. I'm going to be working out, all that stuff. So summer coming, a lot of more improvements for me. Coffee company is going to be going, selling coffee online soon. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.